Hey there, Canadian Wealth Secret Seekers. This is another Secret Sauce episode, and this has been on my mind for a while now. And it came across, say, my desk, or sorry, my listening ears or my reading eyes from Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever. And it's a collection of stories. It's a collection of insights about what never changes in a changing world. And there's a part of it. There's a simple but powerful idea he shares about that we can change how we approach wealth, business, and our lives with this one statement. And it's really about happiness. And it really hit home for me. And it hit home for like how we think about our wealth plans and how we think about where we're trying to go. And the quote from the book says, "Your happiness is the gap between expectations and reality." And in that book, Same as Ever, when you think about it, explains a lot. It's not just what happens to you that matters. It's what happens, what matches what you thought would happen. In a world of business, in a world of personal wealth building, a world of entrepreneurship, expectations can quietly make or break your experience and your outlook. And so today we're going to dive into why setting clear financial expectations, not just setting goals, is the real step toward building financial freedom. We'll show you how this idea is tied to a framework we're going to be sharing, which is about designing your vision and your financial freedom numbers. So if you've ever felt like chasing numbers without feeling any closer to freedom, stick around. We're going to be unpacking that and how to close that gap. And we're going to be sharing a few stories just to get started here, about this idea of your happiness is the gap between expectations and reality. And we were working with a client recently, really successful business owner. From the outside, he had it all. His business was thriving. He had a few investment properties, heavily cash flowing, even a strong stock portfolio that, felt like this was a safety net. By most people's standards, this person was doing incredibly well. And by his standards, he felt like he was doing well. But in one of our conversations, he said something that really stuck with us. He said, "I thought I'd feel different by now." And that's why he reached out to us to talk about, say, next steps and what he could be doing to fill some of the gaps he was feeling. And when we asked what he meant, he paused. He said, I don't know. I just thought that hitting these financial numbers, if I by being here at this time of my life, I would feel different. I could relax. I felt like I would have survived by now. But instead, it feels like I'm just chasing the next thing. And I don't even know what that next thing is. And this is where it feels like it clicked for him and us, is that he had worked so hard to build financial success. I think we all try to, but he never actually designed the clear expectations for what success was supposed to look like and feel like. Like there's no defined vision, no target that would tell them you're here, you made it, And I think a lot of us have that, is that we have this vague idea of like what financial freedom will look like without actually engineering what that should look like and what would be acceptable and what we'd be happy with. So without clear expectations, like even financial wins, like major financial wins, can feel super hollow. So without a vision, the progress can feel like running on a treadmill. And I think this is where this business owner was. And it can happen no matter how fast you feel like you're moving. Now, there's a story in the book that helps kind of make this become a reality or hit home a little bit better. And it helps explain this idea about the gap between expectation and reality, and why we need to set those clear expectations and those goals and say those targets to know that we've made it to those goals. And has to deal with like what we think is the golden age in our societies or our society. And I think, Morgan Housel asked people, he said, like, what decade in our history would you say is like the golden age, or the age where like people were prosperous? And most people would say the 1950s. And I think you say like, that's the golden age. You look back on it, you're like, hey, remember Leave It to Beaver? Or remember, people's golden age was, we had very prosperous time. We had a lot of say, equivalents across the board, and people felt like they had money in their pockets. But when Morgan Housel kind of like dug into that idea, things weren't like actually better off financially or economically. they felt better off. And that's the gap between expectation and reality. Because if you adjust for inflation, the average income today was double that what was in the 90s. And by almost every objective measure, healthcare, technology, education, life expectancy, our world is better today than it was. But most people wouldn't say today you feel financially better than a person who was in the 90s. And that's where that gap between expectation and reality is, because back in the 90s, even though like you may have made a certain amount of income, but the person next to you, the neighbor across town within your same town pretty much made the same as you. So the distribution between income for a good number of people was about the same. So when you look at, say, your neighbor, you're saying like, well, when I make this, so they make that about as well. So for example, like the doctor in town didn't make much more than, say, the auto worker who is on the assembly line, making cars. Like it wasn't that much more compared to what it is now. So everybody, I had a small house. Everyone had a small house. And so, we went on certain vacations, but everyone took the same types of vacations. There wasn't this comparison that you could constantly see where everyone else was, and it wasn't where you were, which is, I think, why, and he explains this in the book, is that why people viewed the 50s as, say, more prosperous is because they felt, compared to everyone else, just the same. And if everyone else felt pretty good, I felt pretty good. Like I didn't feel like I was behind the ball or behind where everyone else could be. And I think that's a lot different today, right? Like we see a lot of other people's success today. Social media might be, say, one of the main contributors to that effect, is that we constantly see everyone's, best 20%. And we compare it to our worst 80%. And that's part of, say, our financial success as well, is that we constantly think we should be better than where we are. And that's because we see people who are maybe better than where we are. There's another, like hearing about that, and realizing that our happiness is that gap between expectation and reality. Because if our expectations in reality, that gap is small, we're happy. But if that gap is large, we feel frustrated, or we feel, say, that we could be doing better. And that's why we need to set clear goals. We need to set like, this is the real reality of where I could go based off the current inputs that I have. And we make that clear, then that gap is small and we feel happy about where we are, not even considering, what else is out there. And I think that's an important component that we want to address when we start to set clear expectations. You set clear expectations from what you feel or what you can achieve based off a certain level of inputs. We'll talk about that in just a sec. But there's another story that reminded me of this. You probably have heard this one before. It's famous. But it's like a tourist visits a small village and meets, a fisherman who's sitting by the water, fishing, relaxing. Tourist says, if you fished a little longer each day, you could catch more fish. And then you could take those fish to the market and make some more money. And the fisherman's like, gee, okay, that sounds interesting. And the visitor or the tourist says, like, with that money, you could buy a big boat. Then you could build a processing plant and hire a bunch of people and ship your fish around the world. And you'd have a thriving business, which is the dream, having a thriving business. And the fisherman says, like, okay, that sounds great. And then the tourist, says is like, then you could buy a really big house. Those people who work for you could do your work for you. And then, you could just sit back and relax. And now you have a thriving business that works for you instead of you going to fish, which is the dream, right? That's the dream. And the fisherman says, but so I could do all of that so that I could then sit on the beach and relax? Yes, that's exactly right. And then I could fish when I feel like it? Exactly. That's right. He's like, but that's what I do already, And I think this is also this, like, it reminds me of this same theme, is that if you don't define your expectations clearly, you could spend your whole life chasing what you already had or what you already, you already wanted. And I think, or worse is that you pass the level that you would have made you happy, but you didn't define it. So you worked more than you needed to get to that happiness level. And I think that's kind of the big frame. One of the pieces of the framework that we're trying to build is part of that framework is designing your vision for financial freedom, which is why we need to make that a first step. So no matter where I am on my journey to financial freedom or financial success, I need to know where I need to go, what I need to get to, and what does that look like? So first thing we need to know, like, where are we today? Let's get real about our financial position. Like, what does my net worth look like? What does my income look like? What do my expenses look like? Like, you've heard maybe in past episodes, Kyle and I discuss the budgeting, the budgeting debate. Like, should we get to the granular and look at every single dollar where it goes, or should we make sure that we're paying ourselves first and not worrying about the other things? Like, no matter where you are, you have to get clear about where your financial like your financial snapshot is currently. And then you got to think about like your runway, like how far are you, like what would be the reality? What would be your goal, your dream, to hit your financial numbers or financial freedom? Like, is it, I want to work till I'm 65, when I want to work to my 55? Like, we have to define like what that working world looks like later in life so that you can reverse engineer the pathway forward. Like, maybe your expectation is that you will sit by the beach, and fish when you want to. Or maybe it is like, I feel like I could work for a long time because I really enjoy the work that I do. I think we have to get clear on like what that is. We have to write that down. Like, we kind of take it for granted sometimes. Like, so yeah, I know what I want my life to look like 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. But we're going to encourage you to like grab your piece of paper and write it down. And what is it that you're aiming for? Is it more wealth? Is it cash flow now, later? Is it legacy for your family? Or is it just, that financial freedom? Is to like be able to spend time the way you want, like the fisherman was doing already. So your goals are your expectations. And if you don't set them clearly, you're constantly going to be misjudging your progress. You'll keep chasing without ever feeling like you're actually winning. We're big proponents of the book John Doerr wrote, which is called Measure What Matters. And it guides a lot of our business decisions in, say, in Wealth Secrets, also business decisions in our math consultancy world that we still operate, and helping people get clear on those objectives. And in that book, he talks about the OKR process, which is objectives and key results, and that we can't get to where we're going unless we measure what matters. And that applies in our financial situations too. Like, we need real, measurable, meaningful objectives, and we need to set measurement points along the way to help you judge where you are and if you're on track. And that's why setting those clear goals of where you want to go, and then going, okay, where do I have now? And what's the gap between those two things? And how do I achieve those? Like, if I can create and reverse engineer the pathway forward, like, is it contributing to this account this much money every time? And if I fast forward my average compounding growth, I'm going to have this much by 30 years from now, and that's enough. Maybe it's just visiting with a financial consultant who can then help you do that, because maybe the math is complex for you. No matter what, like, getting clear there can help you set that and reverse engineer so that you know what your expectations are and what reality actually is. Because I think the best thing you can do is actually get clear on the reality. Is like, okay, I think I'm going to have $5 million in 30 years, but am I using the right inputs, and am I contributing to that number so that the math actually works out, that I get there? And I think a lot of us just assume that if we just do these good things, that eventually I'll have a bigger pot. And I think that's the hope and pray method instead of the reverse engineer method. And we're big fans of the reverse engineer method to make sure that we get there by doing the right inputs. And so sometimes it's like, when we get, and that's the next kind of part of that framework, is to say, like, you're going to get clear on your snapshots today. You're going to look at your runway. You're going to look at what you're really aiming for. You're going to set your objectives, which are those goals. But then you're going to say, like, okay, let's now create the set of inputs that allow me to get there, and then just focus on the inputs. Don't worry about the outputs. Worry about the inputs, because if you worry about the outputs will occur. And if you've set up your inputs correctly and reverse engineered, then you're on the track to get there. And that's a really important move, because focusing on inputs can make it real granular enough to be like, all I have to do is do these two things. I think from Atomic Habits, like we used to pull a lot from that book. And that book talked about, if you want to run, a marathon, your first baby steps, like the atomic habits, the small habits, is like, how do I run a marathon? Well, one step at a time, obviously. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse engineer that pathway forward. And the first step of that was put my shoes by my bed. So when I wake up, I put my shoes on. If I put my shoes on, I'm more likely to run. And it's a kind of that was reverse engineer moments to get you there. If all I have to do is focus on putting my shoes on, which is an input, and then doing the run that day, which is an input, eventually the output will happen. And that's an important lesson I think we've learned and say our business clients learn, and helping them get real on the expectations of where they're headed and the reality that they currently live in and where they want to go, so that the happiness can happen, right? The happiness has to happen because we've shrunk the gap between the expectation that we want and the reality that we live. And I think that's an important component. So like, the business owner who never defined enough, they keep chasing those bigger numbers, and they feel more stressed now than they did probably 5 years ago. The investor who expected 20% returns every year, even when they earn strong 8-10% returns, which is amazing, they feel disappointed at the end of that time because they had those expectations and reality were off. And the bigger problem is when your expectations and reality are off and you get to the end of a timeline that you thought you would be there, what happens is people scrap their ideas. And then they start over and they say, I'm going to try something new. And when you start trying something new, you pretty much usually interrupt the compounding effect of any sort of financial growth that you're on. And that right there has huge effects on, say, achieving goals. And if you keep switching focuses and keep changing your processes and you reverse engineer new plans and new plans and new plans, usually you're not going to get to where you need to go. It's about compounding, and those small atomic habits get compounded over time. So also the family member, they said, like, if I just want to leave a legacy, but they haven't defined what that really means. They've got no estate plan, no clarity, and now their wealth could actually cause family confusion instead of family security. When that happens, then we need to have that clarity. So our call to action here today is to make sure that we try to shrink the gap between expectation and reality. And to do that is getting really clear around where you want to go and what does the pathway look like to get there. And set what are those measurables that you can use to check in along the way to make sure that you are hitting them, so that your expectation and versus reality is shrunk as often as you can. And I think that's an important component of what you want to do to get started. Is, again, some of that kind of framework to build on is, where's our snapshot today? What's the runway that I want to work on? What am I really trying to do here? And then what goals, like what actual numbers, measurable, meaningful objectives can I put into place? And what are those measurement points along the way? And then what are the inputs that make it happen? That's what we do when we make financial decisions. And that's what we help our clients do when we help them shrink the gap between expectation and reality. And that's a big part of what we've been doing lately, is making sure that the reality matches our expectations. So that is, say, our secret sauce today, is to help shrink that gap. And if you would like us to help look at your gap and develop a plan with you, then reach out to us. Head on over to CanadianWealthSecrets.com/discovery. And we could hop on a call and kind of look at your financial snapshot and see where we could go. CanadianWealthSecrets.com/discovery. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.